see that right here, it's secured to the lathe bed, and I have a plate on top that has a focal point that's screwed into the base plate below and allows that whole thing to swivel in an arc. And depending on where I peg the hole, I can make the arc bigger, smaller, whatever. So I can try to find a shape that conforms to the size, to the bowl, and how I want it to look when I'm done fluting. So this is an example. You can see it's gonna rotate, and you'll see I've made a stop on the bottom plate to prevent the router going any further. You can see right there that clamp serves as the stop. This is the Paul Howard jig, which I'm going to use today, and this has some interesting features. The first is that you have these little guide bushings, and you've got this little kind of nose piece, and the router bit fits through the guide bushings. And it allows you to set the depth of your router cut, and in that manner you can take light cuts and go back and go deeper and deeper till you hit that router bushing right here. And the other thing it does is if you create a collar on your piece of work, that collar will be your end stop or your stop. So it can do that as well. The other thing you'll notice with this is you can, as opposed to a flatbed sled that it's mounted to here, it has this component right here. And if I take these blocks out, and I mount this onto this, and then I mount this to the table, then I can turn that whole structure and create an arc. And again, I can move it in and out. So it has that function as well into the piece. Well, what happened here? And you can make these bushings to any dimension you want, depending on the bit that you use, and whether you want a large collar, a wide collar, or a narrow collar. And again, depending on what kind of bit and the size of the diameter of the bit, you can have it sit in it. Lost my control. And this is an example. You can see this V-bit, V-groove bit, is protruding just that far. That's a small collar, that's a wider collar. So I can kind of taper it, and I can make as many of these bushings as I want. You can make them out of plastic, which I thought was going to be a great idea, but you've got to make sure that there's a lot of clearance, because otherwise if the bit touches it at all, it melts. So you got to provide a little, and this is a round nose, and again you can see, you can set the depth. And this is just what we were talking about at the bottom. It allows the bushings to adjust the amount of relief from the edge, and it also allows adjustment of the depth of the router cut. And these are just some examples that you can do. These are not mine, but this is from the web of things that you can do with this kind of a jig. And depending on where the router is in relation to your work, you can produce different cuts. So if the router jig is dead center to the spindle, it'll be a straight line. If I raise this, then I'm going to get an angle going up. And if I lower it below the center line, it'll go the other direction. And so you can actually make kind of counter cuts to get different appearances. Now this is the other way to secure a router, and this is based off the banjo. And this is a table that I've made that fits in the banjo. And this router jig that holds the router has a lip. So you can see that these have a lip on the front. And this lip under the front fits under this piece of wood right here. You can see there's a little space underneath that. And the nice thing about that is it keeps the front part of the router from raising up or down. So it keeps it secure. Some people even recommend having a similar piece there on the back end, but I don't know that I feel that that's necessary because I'm putting enough weight down on it. Going in with the router, so. Now, yes, there's other ways you can do it. You can use it as a, I don't think I brought an example. You can put one on the other side and then turn this way, and then it can slide in as a plunge router. So, for example, I cut these holes in that fashion. I did the fluting, and then using basically the same fluting, was able to then go back and just add an additional detail above. There's an example of that. So you can see this would be one of the ways to do that, is to goes right on the tray, and the router jig slides in that holder. Show them your you have there with the banjo. This right here? Yeah, so this is actually that, or what I showed you just a second. And you can see that there's a little lip right there. I got the base. I wanted a nice sturdy base because I didn't want this to be flexing. This actually is a carving stand from Spirocraft. And I unfortunately, I think Spirocraft now is no longer selling anything because I think the owner has some medical issues. So they're taking a break in terms of selling. And it comes in a 1 inch post. This lathe has a 3/4 inch, but 5/8, yeah. So let's move on to indexing. And that's the third component to be able to do this successfully. Indexing in wood turning is basically the process of dividing the circumference of a workpiece into equal parts. And an indexing wheel like this is attached to the headstock, allows you to set the intervals basically, so that you can have consistent iterations or fenestrations or flutes. This is actually the indexing wheel that I use. And I've been very happy with it. It comes with the wheel. It comes with actually the spindle lock, which has a magnetic base, and it allows you to flex. And as you can see, the wheel has 4 different rings. The outside ring has 144 holes. The next ring has 120 holes. The next one has 90, and the final one has 16. And as you can see from this, depending on which ring you use, you get various degrees off the circumference of a circle. I show this for 2 reasons. One is this extension, spindle extension that I use, and that allows me to get it further from the plate to be able to come around with my jigs. The other, this shows you one way of how to set the next hole to go to. One is using a peg, and that's what I used for a while. And then the peg started falling out. And then I was like, oh gosh, I got to recount and go all the way back. And so now what I do is I just take a magic marker and mark the plate right here. Mark the holes that I need to mark it, and then when I'm finished, I can wipe it off with alcohol and do it again. That's idiot proof. So we talked a little bit about finding the center line, and there's several ways you can do it. This is a jig where you can just attach a pencil to the top, and this will slide on your platform and mark the center line. This happens to be adjustable, although it wasn't small enough to do the 6-inch spread on this one. You can use the tool rest. You can use that and just mark it. And then the other thing you can do is you can buy 1/4-inch lead that you can actually put in the router, in your 1/4-inch router collet, secure it, and then mark it if you want to be sure that you have the flutes where you want to have them. It's so you can see that's a 1/4-inch lead pencil. It's just all lead, and you can fit it into your collet, secure it, and then draw right across it. So. And this shows using a platform off the banjo for the center line. So now, how do we decide how many embellishments or flutes are we going to make in a piece? And that's always kind of the mental challenge. You need to measure the bowl or the platter or the spindle turning where you think the closest embellishments are going to be. So in a spindle, you want to know the diameter on the thickest part. But it might be that on a platter, you want to know the diameter at the smallest part. And in a bowl, again, depending on how you want it, you might want to measure the outer part. And the easiest way to do that is just take a caliper. You just put it right over where you think where you want the embellishments are going to be, and then just come right over here, measure it in millimeters, and there's your diameter. From there you get the circumference. It's just math. You can either use the radius times 2 times pi, or it's diameter times pi to get the circumference of where where you want the embellishments not to overlap. I mean, if you want it to overlap, that's a different thing, but that will provide a different configuration. Then you have to take the router bit diameter that you're going to use and any spacing that you think you might want in between each flute, add those together and divide that into the circumference, and that'll give you the number of iterations or embellishments you can have at that level without it overlapping. Does that make sense? Then you have to think of a wheel, 360 degrees, and you have to divide that by the number of embellishments you want. So if it's 360 degrees and you want 20 embellishments, it's going to be 15. So let's say 20. If you want 20 embellishments, that would be 18. 18. See, I'm terrible at math. So, and then remembering back your indexing wheel, and everybody might have a different indexing wheel with different number of holes than the circle. So you have to apply this to your own indexing wheel. But on mine, for 144 holes, the outer ring, there's 2.5 degrees between holes. The 120 is 3, the 90 is 4, and the 16 is 22.5 degrees between holes. So you take the number of embellishments that you think you want, divide that into 360, and if it's 12, you get 30 degrees. Now you've got to find a ring on your wheel that will give you 30 degrees. 30 degrees can be divided by 2.5, by 3, by 5, or 6. So I can use either the every 10th hole on the 120 ring, or I can use the 12th hole on the 144 ring. So I found this really, I get confused with this math real easy. And so I was looking at online, and there's a woodturner, William Hunt, that does a lot of making flutes using the Paul Howard jig, and he came up with an Excel spreadsheet. And he said, you know, if anybody wants this spreadsheet, I'll give it to anybody. Well, I contacted him and heard nothing. So I said to myself, well, I can do this. I can make my own spreadsheet. And so there's really, you have to kind of think of this in a little bit different way, and you have to come up with some definitions. Well, you know what the circumference is. It's 2 pi r, or pi times diameter. You know that the maximum number of iterations is the circumference divided by the cutter diameter that you want to use. The cutter space, in other words, of the total circumference, how much space will be taken up by the cutter, will be cutter diameter by the number of iterations. And from that, you can say, all right, how much space do I have how much space do I have left after all those cuts? And that becomes the gap space. And if I divide the gap space by number of iterations, I'll have the gap space between each fenestration. So I was hoping to show you this, but I will show it to you when we come to the demonstrations on how the spreadsheet works. So key points to remember: when buying indexing systems, it doesn't cost that much more to get more rings. So it probably, if you like to do this, more is always better. Always use the locking position. Make sure you develop your own kind of routine as to how to mark the holes so you don't get confused, whether it's pegging or using a magic marker or whatever. And do all of your fenestrations at one sitting and on the same machine. Don't say, gee, I'm going to do some of this and then I'm going to come back later and I might adjust something or bump into something, and then all of a sudden you start cutting and you go, what happened? So, and then finally, never turn the lathe on when indexing. It's very, very easy when you're thinking about turning the switch off on the router is to turn the switch on the lathe. I don't know why it is, but I've done it. You don't want to do it. You'll burn out your machine, your lathe. So you unplug it, and I've already unplugged this. So you make sure that the temptation isn't there. Or if it is there, then nothing happens. So some final thoughts when deciding to embellish wood, pick boring wood. You don't want to use a lot of wood that has a lot of grain because you don't want the embellishments to take away from the grain. And actually, if you have a very boring piece of wood, embellishments can make a big difference. I mean, this is kind of oak. It's not very exciting, but the embellishments enhance that. And same with this. Very kind of routine. Make sure the wood is dry. You can do it in wet wood, but your straight fluting may not end up straight, and you may have some great cracks that are impossible to sand out and fill and make it look good. So as much as you can, try to make sure you're working with dry wood. When you go to think about this piece of wood and what you want to do with it, think about if you're going to use a router, because that will change certain things in the way you design. I could have made this platter here with just something going, just a scalloped out center without a lip. And then I wouldn't have had a means to end it unless I put a stop somewhere on my table. So you just keep that in mind. I was actually hoping to do this bowl as part of my demonstration today, but you can see I've got a stop right here. So I can bring that right up to that to stop it. I designed it because I knew I was going to try to route that. What's that?
That's really pretty wood.
Well,
it's not boring.
Well, this is maple, and it's a bit spalted, but I got away with it here. This is crotch maple that's been spalted. It's not that you can't do it. It's just that, sometimes if you've got burl, you want to show off the burl. You don't want to show off your fenestrations. When you go to route, so these bowls, I turned thick. So I had left a good inch thickness all the way around to dry it out. And then when I came to route it, I finished the exterior part, but didn't thin out the wall on the inside. And the reason for that is that it provides more bulk, so the wood itself is more stable. If it's really thin, it's going to flex. And the other reason is you don't want to cut through the lip of the bowl or the rim of the bowl. So you can always come after you've done that, when you know what your limit is, which would be the depth of the fluting, then you can make your inside so you're not cutting through. And finally, make sure that you sand the surface that you're fluting to your final grit. You don't want to go back later when you have a lot of fluting and try to go from 120 up to 400. It's painful. It's very painful. So that's kind of the end of my didactic portion. And we're going to do 2 demonstrations, hopefully. And the first demonstration, again, I was going to use that bowl over here, but I've fortunately brought another bowl that was a little smaller. This circumference was just too big for the throw, the 6-inch throw. So I've put a different bowl on that, and the circumference of that bowl, which I measured with this, or the diameter, was 185 millimeters. Okay, so
millimeters just because it's easy math.
it's easy math. Yep. Now I can go through all the mental gymnastics that I showed you before of doing the circumference and how big the diameter of the router head is, and figuring out the number of embellishments and trying to figure out the degrees and the math and how it works out. And you can do that. You can do that. And that would tell you, gee, maybe you're going to go every 4 holes, maybe every 3 holes. But the easier way for me is using this spreadsheet. And each of these boxes has a formula behind it. So the only thing I need to put in is the router cutting head diameter, which in this case is 25 millimeters at the depth of where I want to cut it. And all I need to do is put in the circumference, which is, I use radius here instead of diameter. This was 85, this was 185. So I said radius is 92. And then I hit enter, and everything below it does the math. And so this box right here gives me a kind of a quick guide. And if I come over here, this tells me what my gap space is going to be between each flute. I can have 33 millimeters, I can have 4 millimeters. If you start seeing negatives, that means I'm overlapping. Okay? And then, so I can look at this and say, all right, as a quick guide, I'm looking at probably 20, which will give me about 4 millimeters between each flute. I can go here, and now this is my indexing wheel. And I've got the 144 ring, the 120 ring, the 90 ring, and the 16 ring. And if I go down through this, you can see, well, on the 144 ring, I can get down to about 7 millimeters between fluting, and that would correspond to every 8th hole on the 144 ring. That's not bad. I could do, on the 120 position, I can get down to 4 millimeters, and that would be every 6th hole on the 120 ring. Everything else just wasn't working very well. So the 90 degree never gave me a good spacing. Same thing with the 16 hole. So for the purpose of this demonstration, we're going to do the 124 ring, and we're doing every 6th hole. So who wants to be the guinea pig and come up and do this? I'm happy. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I find that if people haven't used routers or haven't used the fluting, it's somewhat helpful to get your hands on it so you feel more comfortable with it and you're not as scared with it. So if anybody wants to try it, now's your chance. If nobody wants to try it, I'll just show you. All right.
Andy,
Yes.
I got a question.
Yes.
Backing up maybe 10 miles.
Okay.
What the hell are these washer rings, gizmos that you put in the router table? Are they there for a reason? They have these different sizes you insert in the.
You're talking about um, these type of bushings.
Yeah.
So if you, and let me just give you an example here. So you can see, and this on the Paul Howard jig, this will mount, and there's a hole right there, so that it goes over the center post of the router, of the collet. So you can put this in there, and then you can put your router bit in it, and you can set the depth in or out depending on where that router bit is in relation to that bushing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then depending on the width of this, that will give you how much relief you have from here to where the cut ends. Does that make sense?
Shaking his head, yes, that's
Yeah. Mostly what it does is it lets you freehand the router because the bushing rubs against the piece itself.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're using just a fixed position, you have to take whatever it gives you with the
Right.
radius. But that lets you just move it along freehand.
I thought this was something there. Isn't there a bushing or a washer that you insert into the plate itself for some reason? And the router goes through?
No, it's actually on the front end of the bit.
I thought there was something that would go into the, I mean, you got an opening in for the router that goes there that big around the, washers that go in there or something to pick up some of that space for some reason.
Well, you have the, this, and I don't know whether you can see this, but I can go back to, I mean, there are, this part right here that secures the router is of a certain size. That's why only this type of router fits in it. And you can, it comes with the Paul Howard jig where you can then insert that into that same circle where the big one goes through, and now you can fit your Dremel inside that. You know, I really spent a lot of time trying to say, gee, wouldn't this be great if I could put the router base into my jig, and then I can adjust the in and out like a plunge router. It just, the base gets too big, and it really limits your ability to come around that corner. So, and you're exactly right. The other advantage to this is now, if you want a set depth, then you don't really need something to anchor in your jig and rotate it like this. You can just take this and move it anywhere you want around this. Yeah, I can go right across this way, and I can go take light cuts, and I can come back and do another deeper cut, and I can come back and do a final depth. And that is an advantage to that. Does that make sense? Okay. I don't know whether that made sense.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
I just remember seeing, I know up in Rochester, we went to a fellow's place that died and his wife was selling all his junk. Had a pouch affair, 7 or 8 circles inside it that would work for the router, and I don't know what that was. I still don't know what they do. You know, each one was a different circle, size circle.
Well, they have different mounts for the bases, the router base, depending on the size of the bit, but that doesn't vary. You aren't, that's more for flat wood routing.
Yeah.
That makes
I think
sense.
it was
Yeah. Yes.
I have a little different twist on that.
Okay.
I do semi-traditional furniture.
Mm-hmm.
See on a lot of that furniture tapered legs
Yes.
with either fluting or reeding on
Right.
it. And let's just say the section of leg that you're going to flute is going to be of a 30-inch leg, maybe 20 inches. Well, clearly the flute or the reed at the top is going to be of a different diameter than
Right.
when it gets to the bottom.
Right.
I have a jig that I've made that allows the router to slide along that.
Right.
But as of today, I've never figured out from the diameter at the top how to adjust the diameter by the time it gets to the base. So in other words, if I've got 12 flutes at the top and the diameter is 1.5 inches, I want 12 flutes at the bottom where the diameter is 1 inch.
Well, you'll get that. The difference will be
Now the diameter of the leg is different, but if I want 12 flutes, I've got to have a different diameter than what I have at the top.
so in your model where you have a 1.5 at the top and 1 at the bottom,
Right.
you're going to figure out how many flutes you can have at the top part. That's the thickest part, so they don't overlap. And you're just going to have to accept it at the bottom. It just kind of tapers out and goes away. If you want the flute to be the whole way through and consistently the whole way through, then you'll actually probably.
Itself taper.
So-
In other words, the flute itself will taper.
So you can see here, picture that this was your leg and it's going around and it's getting smaller. So the flute's widest here, and as it comes down, it tapers.
If you used a flat platform, the distance that your tapered leg is away from your heart, it would then get smaller as it went toward the bottom.
Now the other way,
You would be further away at the bottom than you would be at the top.
so here's maybe a better example. Right here is a candlestick,
Right.
and this is the widest part. And as you
Right.
come down, they get further apart. Now, if you want the grooves to be the same
Correct.
depth the whole way,
Yeah. In other words, if I've got a diameter like this at the top, I'm not going to do this. And I've got flutes going, or
right?
these things going around here like it. When I get to the bottom, it's that big around. Okay? But I want this, that flute down here is only going to be that big.
Right.
And how do I keep depth of that valley? Well, it's going to have to vary as well. So I've tried to use router bits that have a shape on them like this.
Yeah.
And, this being the
Shank.
shank. But what you find is when you vary the depth or try to vary, I just haven't figured out how to keep that flute proportional through 24 inches.
Yeah, and I think
Because as I go down, I have to vary the depth of that, right?
well, it's going to be very hard to keep the exact same spacing throughout the entire.
Correct.
Right.
That's my question.
Yeah.
I have not figured that out.
Yeah, I'm.
Now the way most people will do it that I've seen now, they can't use mechanical means
Right.
to do it.
They use a
They
scraper.
use a scraper.
Right.
Right. And you vary the
depth.
So I'm looking for a mechanical way. And that was my hope is that you might have that
Well, the
answer.
only other thing I can think of is and again, if you use one of these collets and don't use it, and you're just going to slide it along, it will always achieve the same depth.
That's a problem. I think.
So, but that'll give you the same depth.
Deeper at the big end than it is at the small end.
No, it'll be the same depth the whole way.
For the collar.
But the problem you might get into is there might be overlap as it gets smaller.
What I'm saying is, yes, I know it will be, but that's the problem.
Right.
Well, you've got to
That
figure out.
depth has to change,
You've got to
or I'm
figure it on
not
the
gonna have that,
smallest one.
if that depth doesn't change. You understand what I'm saying? The diameter of that reed may be only 1/8 of an inch at the bottom, but it's 3/16 at the top.
Right.
Right? And so that's, how do you achieve that?
I don't know that you can, short of using a scraper.
Well,
Yeah, you know, but I don't know why a scraper would be any different than using this, because the scraper, you've got the same depth the whole way, right?
you know, you vary.
You can vary the depth as you go.
And on my jig at home, I can vary, you know, the platform in relation to the face of the leg. So in other words, if I've got a router that's got a base on it, right? And
Right.
it travels on a platform.
Right.
And so what I do is I vary the platform so that that bit is deeper at the top than it is at the bottom.
Right.
Yeah. But it still geometrically won't achieve
Yeah.
an even number of
Right.
proportional reads. It just
It won't.
mechanically,
It
I don't
won't.
think
You
it's
won't be able to
possible.
do that and achieve the same depth.
But
you
don't
can't do
wanna
both.
achieve the same depth. And the problem is, by the way, that router bit I'm talking about, the radius on that router bit needs to change as it goes from top to bottom.
I understand your
You can't
plight.
do that, right?
Yeah.
And what you try to do is you try to vary the depth of that. But then the radius still has got you, it's not
Right.
gonna- you have to go back and you have to round off. The more you get towards the bottom, the more you have to
Yeah.
fuss with it.
Buy a 5-axis CNC.
Get a carving tool.
Get a carving tool. All right. Ken, you want to try this? It's all set up. I've marked this plate for every 6 hole with a little white drop. If you want to use that, I had my glasses right here. So I'm going to just show you the first. I've done one, and I've moved to the next hole. And I don't know whether that shows it. So I'm going to turn this on. And I'm putting my hand down here, hand on top, and I'm just moving it. That's the stop. Then I can come back, and you can see it. There's a little burning there. And then you just now move to the next hole, put it in where it's marked, and you're ready to go. Turn it.
The speed you go across.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is something that you get to look at the final product, and if there's a lot of burning, you know, you can slow this down.
I'm talking about the speed of travel with the router. How fast you move across the
Again,
waves.
you can
Just gotta watch it.
Just gotta watch it. All right, I'll do one more. I reduced the speed a little bit. Now I could come back and I'll do one of those where I come back with it still in it. And that may actually, who knows, it might be better. Okay, so the other thing, this turned a little bit, so this was loose. Okay, and you can see the little curve there. What happened? Nice design feature, but all right, you want to do it?
Design opportunity, right?
Come on over with me. I'll change spots. Okay, and just put one hand here, one hand there. There's the switch right there, and you're ready to go.
Okay.
This is the more important hand of the
It's the one
two.
that's actually pushing.
Yeah, and keeping it flat on here.
Okay.
Actually, I got probably cleaner cuts coming back with it on. Okay, you know, you can
Yeah,
move.
got a little.
Yep.
Here's your fruit. Okay, out.
Okay, this time don't turn it off till you go there and back.
Okay.
Now you can turn it on. That might be a little bit better.
A little bit, yeah. A little bit burning up.
I think the difference is that it burns when the bit slows down when you turn it off. Where this way it might be a little bit better.
Come back and then
Yep.
get back at it.
And you can keep going.
Sure. Good.
Hills like
You're doing a good job.
be similar, they would just get smaller. Right, like that. Oh, you could do that. Yeah, you could cut them in and then turn it around there.
This one doesn't want to go in.
It's some maybe the
So move the post.
let's see this. There we go.
I must have moved that.
Yeah, and that happens.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'd go out and try it.
Again, make sure it's not in the wood.
Make sure if we look at that. No, okay, that's stopping me from going any further.
Make sure it goes all the way in there. There you go. Locks in. Yep.
Not in the wood. Uh-oh. Oh, I never go back.
Oh, that's interesting. Why did that change?
Want to tighten it, right?
Yeah, there we go. There. Okay. Now we lost.
Yep.
So we'll go back.
Get out of the way.
Back.
You have to take it off and try to put it
That's
back on
that
again.
one. That's a. Oops, we moved it.
They got moved, yeah.
All right, so we now know it's got to be
You're still a little high.
one above.
Or go down one more. Do one more. Never gonna get right.
Yeah.
No. Too much. That's too far.
So it's going to be.
That one right there is either that one or the next one. The closest you're gonna get.
I think that's pretty. That's pretty good. So the next one will be
Two below.
two below that. So that would put it right there.
Nope. Yeah.
Two below.
One, two, yeah, third one down. Third one. Yep. So 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Right there.
Yep.
See how it looks.
Okay.
One more.
Might as well keep going and finish it all. I think we're doing our.
Pretty close.
It is moving a little bit. I don't wanna mess everything up, but
That's where having this locked in.
yeah, you're right.
Could be, yeah, it does come loose on you.
All right. So you can move it.
How many flutes are we doing?
Oh, you can finish it off.
How many are we doing?
We're doing, I think we said it was 12. Actually, I think it's 18.
What's that?
18. Keep going. Not very secure, but you can keep going and finish. Might as well finish it off.
All right.
Way to tighten that, but I don't think there is.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Wow. Oops.
Yep. All right. Good. 3 more.
That loose?
Yep, it's all right. Yeah. One last one. Okay. Done. All right.
One of the things you probably want to do is make sure this is clean too, if that's your stop.
Yep, that's right.
Think about that as I'm doing it, see it now.
Good job. So you can see we had one little boo-boo, and that's when everything moved on this one part here. It slipped.
What would be the best way? I mean, put a wrench on it. Like I
Yeah.
said, if we had a locker device on the lathe,
Right,
lock that in place, lathe B.
right.
Right? Then wrench it,
Yep.
get it tight.
Yep. Nice job. Here you go. You get to keep that.
Don't break it for show and tell.
Yeah, that's right. So if you, I guess this is a good time for the show and tell, and I don't know whether I don't want to keep people if they've got other things to do. So the next thing was actually just reproducing what this is. and it's a different bit. We use the table. I'll use a table on the lathe that has a lip, and you just slide it down and do the reading on the candlestick. So if why don't you go ahead with your show and tell, and then you can decide whether you want to go ahead with that or not, or whether it's getting too late.